Welcome to the English learning community. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode. Today, we're diving into something truly special. A story that's not just going to improve your listening and writing skills, but also inspire you to take your English to the next level. So, grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Shadowing success. Mimic native speakers for better English. The boy who listened. In a small village in the countryside of England, there lived a 14-year-old boy named Oliver. Oliver was a quiet boy with a curious mind and a love for stories. He spent most of his time reading books, listening to the radio, and watching old movies. But there was one thing Oliver struggled with: his English. Oliver had grown up in a family that spoke a regional dialect, and while he could understand standard English perfectly, speaking it fluently was a challenge. At school, his classmates often teased him for his accent and the way he stumbled over words. "Why do you talk so funny, Ollie?" they would say, laughing. Oliver would blush and stay silent, wishing he could disappear. One day, Oliver's English teacher, Mrs. Thompson, announced a school competition. "We're going to have a storytelling contest," she said. "Each of you will prepare a story to tell in front of the class. The winner will represent our school at the county finals." Oliver's heart sank. The thought of standing in front of the class, speaking in English, made him feel sick. But deep down, he wanted to try. He loved stories, and he had always dreamed of sharing his own. That evening, Oliver sat at his desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. He wanted to tell a story about his grandfather, who had been a sailor and had traveled the world. But every time he tried to write, the words felt wrong. "What if I mess up? What if everyone laughs at me again?" he thought. Just then, Oliver's older sister, Clara, walked into the room. Clara was studying to be a teacher, and she had always been Oliver's biggest supporter. "What's wrong, Ollie?" she asked, noticing his worried expression. Oliver sighed. "I have to tell a story in front of the class, but I'm scared. My English isn't good enough." Clara sat down next to him. "Your English is fine, Ollie. You just need to practice. Have you ever heard of shadowing?" Oliver shook his head. "What's that?" "It's a technique where you listen to native speakers and try to mimic them," Clara explained. "You can use movies, podcasts, or even the radio. The idea is to copy how they speak, their rhythm, their tone, their pronunciation. It's like learning to dance by following someone's steps." Oliver's eyes lit up. "Do you think it would work?" "Absolutely," Clara said. "And I'll help you. Let's start tonight." The first lesson. Clara pulled out her laptop and opened a video of a famous British storyteller, David Attenborough. "Listen carefully," she said. "Pay attention to how he speaks. Then try to repeat what he says, exactly how he says it." Oliver listened intently as Attenborough's calm, clear voice filled the room. "The natural world is full of wonders," Attenborough said. Oliver repeated the sentence, trying to match the rhythm and tone. At first, it felt awkward, but Clara encouraged him to keep going. They spent the next hour practicing. Clara played short clips, and Oliver shadowed them, mimicking Attenborough's voice as closely as he could. By the end of the session, Oliver felt a little more confident. "This is fun," he said with a smile. "See," Clara said, "you're already getting better. Just keep practicing and you'll be ready for the competition." In the next part, Oliver continues practicing shadowing and discovers a surprising connection between his grandfather's stories and the art of storytelling. But when the day of the competition arrives, he faces a challenge that tests his newfound confidence. The sailor's story. Over the next few weeks, Oliver practiced shadowing every day. He listened to audiobooks, watched documentaries, and even mimicked the voices of characters from his favorite movies. At first, it felt strange to copy someone else's way of speaking. But soon, he he started to notice changes. His pronunciation became clearer, his sentences flowed more smoothly, and he began to feel more confident. One evening, as Oliver was practicing, his grandfather walked into the room. Grandad Jack was a tall, wiry man with a face weathered by years at sea. He had retired from sailing years ago, but he still loved to tell stories about his adventures. "What are you up to, lad?" Grandad Jack asked, sitting down in his favorite armchair. Oliver explained the storytelling competition and how he was practicing shadowing to improve his English. Grandad Jack listened intently, his eyes twinkling with interest. "You know," he said, "when I was a young sailor, I had to learn how to speak with people from all over the world. I didn't always get it right, but I learned by listening and copying. It's how I picked up bits of French, Spanish, and even a few words of Mandarin." Oliver's eyes widened. "Really? Did people laugh at you when you made mistakes?" Grandad Jack chuckled. "Oh, all the time, but I didn't let it bother me. I just kept trying. And you know what? Those mistakes turned into some of the best stories." He leaned forward, his voice growing softer. "Let me tell you about the time I tried to order food in a small village in France. I thought I was asking for bread, but I ended up with a live chicken instead." Oliver burst out laughing. "What did you do?" "Well, I couldn't very well take a chicken back to the ship, so I ended up keeping it as a pet. We called her Henrietta. She laid eggs for us all the way to the next port." Oliver laughed so hard his sides hurt. "That's amazing, Grandad. I wish I could tell stories like you." Grandad Jack smiled. "You can, lad. You just have to believe in yourself, and remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about sharing something real." Inspired by his grandfather's story, Oliver decided to base his competition entry on one of Grandad Jack's adventures. He chose the tale of Henrietta the chicken, adding his own twists and turns to make it even more entertaining. The day of the competition. The day of the storytelling competition arrived, and Oliver felt a mix of excitement and nerves. He had practiced his story countless times, shadowing the voices of his favorite speakers to get the rhythm and tone just right. But standing in front of his classmates was a different challenge altogether. As he waited for his turn, Oliver watched the other students perform. Some were confident and polished, while others stumbled over their words. But the audience was supportive, clapping and cheering for everyone. Finally, it was Oliver's turn. He walked to the front of the room, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath and began. "Many years ago, my grandfather was a sailor," he started, his voice steady. "He traveled to faraway places and had many adventures. But one of his funniest adventures began with a simple mistake." As Oliver told the story of Henrietta the chicken, he found himself getting lost in the tale. He mimicked his grandfather's gruff voice, the French shopkeeper's confused tone, and even Henrietta's indignant squawks. The class erupted in laughter, and Oliver felt a surge of confidence. When he finished, the room burst into applause. Oliver's classmates were grinning, and even Mrs. Thompson looked impressed. "Well done, Oliver," she said. "That was wonderful." The twist. A surprise announcement. After all the students had performed, Mrs. Thompson stood up to announce the winner. "This was a tough decision," she said. "But the winner of today's competition is Oliver." Oliver's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe it. His classmates cheered, and Grandad Jack, who had come to watch, gave him a thumbs up from the back of the room. As Oliver walked up to receive his prize, a shiny trophy and a book of stories, Mrs. Thompson leaned down and whispered, "You were brilliant, Oliver. Your storytelling was full of life and emotion, and your English was perfect." Oliver smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. But it wasn't about being perfect. It was about sharing something real." In the final part, Oliver prepares for the county finals and faces a new challenge that tests his confidence once again. But with the support of his family and the lessons he's learned, he discovers that success isn't about winning. It's about finding his voice. The county finals. Winning the school competition was a turning point for Oliver. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. His classmates no longer teased him about his accent. Instead, they asked him to tell more stories. Even the kids who had once laughed at him now came up to him in the hallway saying, "Ollie, tell us about Henrietta again." But Oliver's journey wasn't over yet. The county finals were just 2 weeks away, and he needed to prepare a new story. This time, the competition would be tougher. Students from all over the county would be participating, and Oliver knew he had to bring his best. One evening, as Oliver sat at the kitchen table brainstorming ideas, Granddad Jack walked in with a mischievous grin. "I've got a story for you, lad," he said, "one I've never told anyone before." Oliver's eyes widened. "What is it?" Granddad Jack leaned in, his voice low and dramatic. "It's about the time I got stranded on a deserted island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean," Oliver gasped. "You never told me that." "Well, it's not exactly a happy story," Granddad Jack admitted, "but it's a true one, and I think it's time you heard it." Over the next hour, Granddad Jack told Oliver the incredible tale of how his ship had been caught in a storm, how he had washed ashore on a tiny island, and how he had survived for weeks with nothing but his wits and a few supplies. It was a story of courage, resilience, and hope, and Oliver knew it was perfect for the competition. The challenge. A new fear. Oliver spent the next 2 weeks practicing his new story. He used the shadowing technique to mimic the voices of adventurers and explorers, trying to capture the drama and emotion of Granddad Jack's tale. But as the day of the county finals approached, Oliver began to feel a new kind of fear. What if he forgot his lines? What if the judges didn't like his story? What if he let everyone down? The night before the competition, Oliver couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with doubts. Finally, he got up and tiptoed downstairs. To his surprise, he found Granddad Jack sitting in the living room, sipping a cup of tea. "Couldn't sleep either, eh?" Granddad Jack said with a smile. Oliver shook his head. "I'm scared, Granddad. What if I mess up?" Granddad Jack patted the seat next to him. "Come here, lad. Let me tell you something." Oliver sat down, and Granddad Jack put an arm around his shoulders. "When I was stranded on that island, I was scared too. I didn't know if I'd ever see my family again. But you know what kept me going? Stories. I told myself stories. About home, about the people I loved, about the adventures I'd have when I got back. Those stories gave me hope." He looked at Oliver, his eyes serious. "You're not just telling a story tomorrow, lad. You're giving people hope. You're showing them that no matter how tough things get, there's always a way forward, and that's more important than any trophy." Oliver felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Thank you, Granddad. I'll try my best." The competition. A twist of fate. The next day, Oliver arrived at the county hall, his heart pounding. The room was packed with students, teachers, and parents. The judges sat at a long table at the front, their faces serious and focused. One by one, the contestants took the stage. Some told funny stories, others told sad ones, but all of them were talented. Oliver watched nervously, clutching his notes. Finally, it was his turn. He walked to the stage, his legs trembling. The spotlight was blinding, and the audience seemed like a sea of faces. He took a deep breath and began. "Many years ago, my grandfather was stranded on a deserted island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean," he started, his voice steady. "He had no food, no water, and no way to call for help. But he had one thing: hope." As Oliver told the story, he mimicked Granddad Jack's gruff voice. the howling wind of the storm, and the eerie silence of the island. The audience was spellbound, hanging on his every word. But just as Oliver reached the climax of the story, something unexpected happened. The lights went out, the room was plunged into darkness, and a murmur of confusion spread through the audience. Oliver froze, his mind racing. What should he do? Should he stop? Should he wait for the lights to come back on? Then he remembered Grandad Jack's words. "You're giving people hope." Oliver took a deep breath and continued speaking, his voice strong and clear. "In the darkness, my grandfather found a light, a tiny firefly, glowing like a beacon. And he realized that even in the darkest moments, there's always a spark of hope." As he finished the story, the lights flickered back on. The audience erupted into applause, some people even standing up to cheer. Oliver felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, and a sense of accomplishment. The funny ending, a surprise victory. After all the contestants had performed, the judges deliberated for what felt like hours. Finally, the head judge stood up to announce the winner. "This was an incredibly tough decision," she said, "but the winner of this year's county storytelling competition is Oliver." Oliver's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe it. The audience cheered, and Grandad Jack, who had come to watch, gave him a thumbs up from the back of the room. As Oliver walked up to receive his prize, a shiny trophy and a certificate, the head judge leaned down and whispered, "You were brilliant, Oliver. Even in the dark, you kept going. That's the mark of a true storyteller." Oliver smiled. "Thank you. But I couldn't have done it without my grandfather's stories and his advice." Later, as Oliver and Grandad Jack walked home, Oliver turned to him and said, "Grandad, I think I've found my voice." Grandad Jack ruffled his hair. "And what a fine voice it is, lad. What a fine voice it is." The county finals, a night to remember. Winning the school competition had given Oliver a newfound confidence, but the county finals were a whole different ballgame. Students from all over the region would be competing, and Oliver knew he had to bring his absolute best. He spent every spare moment practicing his story, shadowing the voices of adventurers, explorers, and even his grandfather's gruff tone. He wanted to make Grandad Jack proud. The night before the competition, Oliver was a bundle of nerves. He sat at the kitchen table, rehearsing his lines for what felt like the 100th time. His sister Clara walked in, holding a plate of cookies. "You've been at it for hours, Ollie. Take a break," she said, placing the cookies in front of him. Oliver sighed. "I just want to get it right. What if I forget my lines? What if the judges don't like my story?" Clara sat down across from him. "You're overthinking it, Ollie. Remember why you're doing this. It's not about winning. It's about sharing your story, your grandfather's story. That's what matters." Oliver nodded, but he still felt uneasy. Just then, Grandad Jack walked into the kitchen, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "What's all this moping about?" he asked, grabbing a cookie. "I'm just nervous about tomorrow," Oliver admitted. Grandad Jack chuckled. "Nervous? You? The boy who can mimic David Attenborough better than David Attenborough himself? Come on, lad. You've got this." Oliver smiled faintly. "I hope so." Grandad Jack leaned in, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "Let me tell you something, Ollie. When I was stranded on that island, I didn't have time to be nervous. I had to focus on surviving. And you know what kept me going? Stories. I told myself stories about home, about the people I loved, about the adventures I'd have when I got back. Those stories gave me hope." He patted Oliver's shoulder. "Ineen, tomorrow you're not just telling a story. You're giving people hope, and that's more important than any trophy." Oliver felt a lump in his throat. "Thanks, Grandad. I'll try my best." The competition, lights, drama, and a chicken. The next day, Oliver arrived at the county hall, his stomach in knots. The room was packed with students, teachers, and parents. The judges sat at a long table at the front, their faces serious and focused. Oliver clutched his notes, his heart pounding. One by one, the contestants took the stage. Some told funny stories, others told sad ones, but all of them were talented. Oliver watched nervously, his palms sweating. Finally, it was his turn. He walked to the stage, the spotlight blinding him for a moment. He took a deep breath and began. Many years ago, my grandfather was stranded on a deserted island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, he started, his voice steady. He had no food, no water, and no way to call for help. But he had one thing: hope. As Oliver told the story, he mimicked Grandad Jack's gruff voice, the howling wind of the storm, and the eerie silence of the island. The audience was spellbound, hanging on his every word. But just as Oliver reached the climax of the story, something unexpected happened. The lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and a murmur of confusion spread through the audience. Oliver froze, his mind racing. What should he do? Should he stop? Should he wait for the lights to come back on? Then he remembered Grandad Jack's words, "You're giving people hope." Oliver took a deep breath and continued speaking, his voice strong and clear. In the darkness, my grandfather found a light, a tiny firefly, glowing like a beacon. And he realized that even in the darkest moments, there's always a spark of hope. As he finished the story, the lights flickered back on. The audience erupted into applause, some people even standing up to cheer. Oliver felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, and a sense of accomplishment. The funny twist, a feathered surprise. After all the contestants had performed, the judges deliberated for what felt like hours. Finally, the head judge stood up to announce the winner. "This was an incredibly tough decision," she said, "but the winner of this year's county storytelling competition is Oliver." Oliver's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe it. The audience cheered, and Grandad Jack, who had come to watch, gave him a thumbs up from the back of the room. As Oliver walked up to receive his prize, a shiny trophy and a certificate, the head judge leaned down and whispered, "You were brilliant, Oliver. Even in the dark, you kept going. That's the mark of a true storyteller." Oliver smiled. "Thank you, but I couldn't have done it without my grandfather's stories and his advice." Just as Oliver was about to step off the stage, a loud squawk echoed through the hall. Everyone turned to see a chicken strutting down the aisle, clucking indignantly. Oliver's eyes widened. "Henrietta!" Grandad Jack burst out laughing. "I thought she'd add a bit of drama to the evening." The audience erupted into laughter as Henrietta flapped her wings and hopped onto the stage. Oliver picked her up, shaking his head in disbelief. "You brought a chicken to the competition?" Grandad Jack shrugged, still laughing. "Well, she's part of the story, isn't she?" The judges were in stitches, and even Oliver couldn't help but laugh. Henrietta clucked proudly, as if she knew she was the star of the show. The heartwarming ending. Later, as Oliver and Grandad Jack walked home, Henrietta tucked under Oliver's arm. Oliver turned to his grandfather and said, "Grandad, I think I've found my voice." Grandad Jack ruffled his hair. "And what a fine voice it is, lad. What a fine voice it is." As they walked into the sunset, Henrietta let out a contented cluck, and Oliver couldn't help but smile. Life was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright ridiculous. But that was what made it so beautiful. If you enjoyed today's story and found it helpful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We've got so many more inspiring stories, practical tips, and fun lessons coming your way to help you master English and boost your confidence. And hey, if you're feeling extra motivated, leave a comment below and tell us, what's one mistake you've made while learning English, and what did you learn from it? We'd love to hear your stories and cheer you on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, every step you take is progress, and we're here to support you every step of the way. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep believing in yourself. You've got this.